Dr. Claymark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen as well. So thank you very much for having me. I will try to give a brief overview of the different legislative initiatives on PFAS in the EU. First of all, I just want to give a very brief introduction to what we do at ChemiSec. ChemiSec is a Swedish NGO founded 20 years ago, and what we want to do is to drive the political discussion on hazardous chemicals and reduce the use of hazardous chemicals. So we also, what we do in our work is that we want to challenge companies to improve their chemicals management. And we do that by supporting them in this by a set of online tools, which I will also talk briefly about in their help and to support them to switch to safer chemicals. So what we want to talk to policymakers about is that we want to show that there are positive examples from the business world, companies that do great things and have a very positive chemicals management. And we also work with investors to inform them about the risks and opportunities within the chemical industry, about investing in safer or unsafe chemicals and their economic risks connected to that. So we have a set of tools, and the first of them is the SIN list, which is our list of chemicals we think should be banned. And that is our way to show which chemicals not to use. With the second tool, the ChemiSec Marketplace, we want to show the chemicals that should be used instead, and it's a place for companies to advertise safer alternatives to hazardous chemicals. The third tool is the PFAS guide, which is a support for companies in order to start the journey towards phasing out PFAS explicitly. It is a guide for how to identify PFAS or potential PFAS uses within their products and processes, and how to initiate the work to phase them out. The last two tools, the ChemScore and SIM producers. With ChemScore, we show and rank the chemical producers according to their production of hazardous chemicals, and the SIM producers is the list of which chemicals they produce, the different companies. As I said in the beginning, we want to show that there are companies doing positive things around chemicals, and one way for us to understand these positive influences is through the ChemiSec Business Group, which is a group of companies that we work together with to understand how chemicals legislation can be or how chemicals legislation impact companies. As I mentioned earlier as well, we worked with investors to support them in understanding what is the business opportunities for chemical producers. And we have a coalition of investors with over 60 investors managing $11 trillion, which we also try to talk to and understand how they can influence the chemical industry. One of the most important things for the investors is PFAS and PFAS production. As you know, PFAS is an economic risk for these investors because there is a lot of litigation connected to PFAS production, for example, in the US, and therefore all of these investors ask their chemical companies to phase out and stop producing PFAS. So we also have something called the PFAS movement, which is companies that want to phase out or already have phased out PFAS. And what we want to show with all these examples is that there is a lot of stakeholders that want to phase out PFAS, that want to move ahead with the restriction of PFAS. And I think it's also important to point out that within the EU, we also have a political will to phase out or to take some action on PFAS, mainly because there has been a lot of contamination, and there is a strong will within several member states in EU to actually take action on PFAS and try to phase them out. But now I want to move on to PFAS and what the concern is with PFAS. And as you know, they are also called forever chemicals because they are so persistent that they will stay in nature and in our body for a very long time. PFAS is also found in the blood of most humans. And we also know from science that more and more PFAS chemicals are known to cause severe health and environmental problems, which of course is a very concerning issue since their concentrations are rising all the time. So the environmental levels of PFAS, the concentration in nature, are rising, and this means that we will soon reach levels for many different PFAS chemicals where we also see an effect on the human health and the environment. In summary, we can say that with the PFAS is a large concern, and we are overstepping the planetary boundaries, meaning that we are starting to get effects on many different levels, not only on humans, but also on environmental issues due to the cause of PFAS. In EU, we have something called the Forever Pollution Project, which is a project, a set of different journalists from, I think it was 10 or 12 different countries. As you can see on this map, they have mapped the contaminated sites of the PFAS contaminated sites all over Europe. So the red are the known contamination and blue are presumptive, probably contamination. And this measures to over 17,000 contaminated sites all over Europe. I think that this shows the scale of the PFAS problem we have. There is a similar map for the US, and I've not seen one for Japan. But I also know that there has been a large problem with military bases, which of course you have also in Japan, also US military bases. So there probably is contaminated sites all over Japan as well. So the properties of PFAS, as we've already mentioned, the main and the common concern of all PFAS is the extreme persistent, meaning that they will remain in nature for a long, long time. Apart from this, the persistence, there is also a set of other properties that's connected to PFAS. They are either mobile, which means water soluble, which also means that they will spread in waters very easily, or they are bioaccumulative, which means that they will gather in humans and animals over time. And in addition to this, there is also other additional properties observed in studying PFAS. Many of them are toxic to humans or toxic in the environment, and many of them also show endocrine activity, disrupting the hormone systems of humans. They are also known to accumulate in plants and have what's called long-range transport potential, which means that they can spread easily in nature. And in summary, all of these properties means that we have a very high concern regarding PFAS, and that we need to take action in order to not get too much damage done before we take action. So what is the actual use of PFAS? For the EU in 2020, we have some numbers from the ongoing PFAS restriction work, where the use of the use of PFAS within the EU is 840,000 tons, and the emissions is 75,000 tons. And overall, if we do not take action on PFAS, this means that until 2050, within EU alone, we will have estimated emissions of around over 4 million tons of PFAS in our nature. And I just want to add something that is not on this slide, but there is also very interesting regarding why we are using PFAS. And I think it's important to point out that the performance of many PFAS is extremely high, which means that it's used in a wide variety of different uses and in many different products and processes all over our industries. So moving on to what's being done in the EU regarding PFAS and the legislative initiatives in EU. One set of PFAS has already been regulated within the POPs regulation, which means persistent organic pollutants. And these are the PFOA, PFOS, and PFHXS, which are fairly old chemicals that has been in use for a very long time. Apart from these chemicals, a few other subsets of PFAS are also restricted within the EU. So what's called the C9 and the C9, C14 is already restricted. The C then, or the number, refers to the length of the carbon chain for these substances. Apart from these substances, the PFAS are used in firefighting foams is also on the table, being looked at as to be restricted. That restriction has not come into force yet, but it's very close to be. Another group called PFHXA is also proposed to be restricted. That work is now on the EU Commission's table, and hopefully it will be coming into force in the coming year or next year. And the final initiative regarding PFAS from the legislator is what's called the universal PFAS restriction, which is the one that will try to restrict all PFAS substances for all uses. So in summary, we have a set of substances within the PFAS family that are already restricted within EU, and we have a very large set of different PFASs that are being considered to be restricted in the EU. And probably these EU initiatives will also influence the global legislative initiative. For example, in the US, there is a lot of legislative initiatives on PFAS. I think it's 33 states that have ongoing or incoming legislation on PFAS. So, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have an EU proposal to ban PFAS for all uses and all substances. And I want to just briefly introduce you to what is a restriction of chemicals within the EU. So restrictions within the EU are used to limit or ban the manufacture, the placing on the market, including imports or use of a substance, but it can impose any relevant conditions, such as technical measures or specific labels. But in principle, it doesn't have to be that, but it can include a range of different substances for a range of different uses. Historically, restrictions have been used for restrict specific uses for specific chemicals, for example, the CMRs in textiles as an example, but it can be applied broadly. And I think that the PFAS restriction is an example of where it's applied in a very broad sense. So the universal PFAS restriction proposal is a restriction on the manufacture, on placing on the market, and the use of PFAS, and it includes all uses and all substances, including fluoropolymers and F-gases. And the scope of the restriction has used the OECD definition of PFAS, which is a fairly broad definition of PFAS that includes a lot of different substances. Of course, this has been under heavy discussion, but that's the way that the legislator has chosen to make sure that they include all PFAS that are persistent. And the justification for having such a broad restriction proposal is, of course, as we have mentioned here already, that they are all very persistent, and that we also see that there are large emissions of PFAS into the nature. In summary, I think that the universal PFAS restriction within the EU is a very ambitious attempt to try to limit the future use of PFAS. But of course, even though the ambition is to regulate all PFAS, there will still be some derogations and exemptions from this restriction. So the proposal doesn't include biocide, pharmaceuticals and plant protection products, but it's limited to the active ingredient within these three different fields. And apart from these three general derogations, there has also been two types of time-limited derogations proposed from the restriction. And the reason for suggesting these different derogations is, of course, that if there are no alternatives to PFAS today, then we need a transition time in order to find and identify these alternatives. And therefore, it is necessary to have a transition time in order to get these alternatives to the market and being viable. So 26 different uses has been proposed for derogation. For example, the use in personal protection equipment in textiles has a derogation. Apart from these 26 proposed derogations, there is also 20, which is called potential derogation, where the legislator has concluded that the evidence base is too weak to propose these as derogations, and they have requested more information in order to transfer them to a proposed derogation. Apart from these derogations, there is also a reporting requirement for the users of these derogations, which means that companies that want to keep using a specific PFAS for one of the derogated uses will have to report on that use in order to be able to do it. And important to point out for these derogations are that all of them, except one, I should correct myself too, are time limited, which means that we are looking at a phase out over time of PFAS for all PFAS and all uses. And how do the legislators find these derogations? They are based on the lack of alternatives, which means that if there are no available and viable alternatives today, there will be a derogation for that specific use. It is important to remember that there has been a lot of discussion within EU with something called essential use, which can define what is essential for society, but that definition has not been used within the PFAS restriction. Since the PFAS restriction and the derogations are based on the availability of alternatives, I just want to mention briefly about what the availability of alternatives are for these different PFAS uses. So on the top right corner of this graph, we have identified which uses are used in high volumes, but where we also have available solutions. Among these uses are the F-gas applications, which means the use of PFAS substances in refrigerants, in air conditioners, and similar. The F-gases, or the fluorinated gases, is a very important sector because they make up 73% of the total emissions in EU. Therefore, it's very important to reduce the use of this specific subset of PFAS substances. Other uses which are used in high volumes and we have available solutions is textiles, food contact material, and construction, for example. On the lower right corner, we have the uses where the volumes are very small, but we also have available solutions. Some of the uses within this group is what's called the consumer mixtures. It's cosmetics, it's ski waxes, lubricants, and metal plating. For many of these uses, as mentioned, there are alternatives, and for many of the uses, the alternatives are also in use, meaning that the PFAS has been already phased out. In the middle, the purple one, we have the medium high volumes, not so high, and a growing number of solutions, which means that we still need more alternatives to be found within these sectors. For these uses, especially for the medical devices, we still need a large amount of research in order to find new solutions and to implement these solutions. On the lower left corner, we have the uses where we have a lack of available viable, safe alternatives, but with a very large potential for growth in volume. Some of these sectors are, for example, the energy sector, where the batteries and fuel cells are two of the large uses, and which has a very high potential for growing in the future. For both of these uses, we don't have available alternatives today, batteries and fuel cells, but there is a lot of research being done and a lot of potential, which means that we will probably have solutions of alternatives in the coming years. For electronics and semiconductors, it is a similar situation, especially for semiconductors, where PFAS is used in many different process steps for manufacturing semiconductors. We still lack viable alternatives for many of these applications. So in summary, regarding alternatives, I think that it's fair to say that for many uses, we have alternatives which can be implemented and we can phase out PFAS already today. But for other uses, it's clear that we still lack alternatives, and we need research and development in order to find these alternatives and to develop the new solutions. So it's fair to say that we still have a way to go until we have identified alternatives for all the different PFAS uses. And it's also important to point out that this is, of course, also a big business opportunity for innovative companies that can provide these new solutions. Even though we often talk about the industry having a problem because PFAS will impact their business, it is also a very big business opportunity for many companies that can provide these new solutions for the future. I will try to also give you a very brief understanding of how the PFAS or the REACH restriction works. REACH is the chemicals legislation in EU. So the first step of a REACH restriction is the preparation and submission of a restriction proposal, which has been done within the PFAS restriction by 5 countries within the EU. So it's Germany, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And these 5 countries has, of course, gathered information. They have also had a call for evidence, which is when they request different stakeholders to submit information regarding the PFAS uses and applications and volumes, etc. So when the 5 member states have finished their work, which they did now almost 1 year ago, or more than 1 year ago, they will hand in the proposal for a PFAS restriction to the European Chemicals Agency called ECHA. At the European Chemicals Agency, there are 2 different scientific committees, the Risk Assessment Committee called RAC, and the Socioeconomic Analysis Committee called SEAC, and they will investigate and scrutinize the work done by the 5 member states and the proposal for the PFAS restriction. So the Risk Assessment Committee look at the risk assessment and the justification of if we need within the EU a restriction of PFAS. The other scientific committee, the Socioeconomic Analysis Committee, looks at the cost and benefit of having a PFAS restriction and also on the availability of alternatives and the information about those. The scientific committees, as you can hear from the name, are doing a scientific work, which means that the information they gather and the information they collect should be scientifically based, and therefore they assess the information from a scientific point of view, and therefore things like claims and statements which don't have a scientific base will not be considered for these committees. So the last step of a restriction process is when the European Chemicals Agency's scientific committees are finished, they will hand in their proposal to the European Commission, which has the power to decide whether there will be a restriction or not. And it's important to remember that the European Commission can, of course, make amendments and change the proposal that they get from the European Chemicals Agency, which means that there can still be amendments and new derogations, for example, that the European Commission can add to a proposal. So where are we in the process right now? What's the status? So right now we're at the European Chemicals Agency. They have received the restriction proposal from the 5 member states, and the scientific committees are now scrutinizing the dossier from the member states to form their opinions. So as I mentioned previously, there are 2 committees, the Socioeconomic Analysis Committee and the Risk Analysis Committee, and they are right now doing their work, investigating the dossier and trying to gather more information to form their opinion. Since the process has been delayed due to the fact that there is a lot of data to process, we are a bit behind of the time schedule. The scientific committees should have finished mid this year, but that they will probably be very much delayed from that. And this means that we're still waiting for the working plan for 2024. The working plan will show which sectors that the scientific committees will focus on during the year, but we have not seen that yet, and we are not sure how much work the scientific committees will be able to cover during this year. So what is the reason for this delay? What is the reason for all of these data that has been gathered? So there has been a public consultation where all stakeholders connected to PFAS have been asked to submit information. The reply amount to this public consultation was massive. As you can see here, they received 5,600 replies, which is a factor of 10 more than they usually get from such a consultation. And I think that we also see the sort of a problem with this system, with the numbers from this, that there is a large amount of replies coming from companies and industry organizations, and a very small amount of replies coming from academia, authorities, and NGOs. And of course, this will not give a full picture of the impact, but a slightly biased picture from the industry point of view. It is also important to point out here that there is a high number of individuals that have replied to the public consultation. 27% of the replies come from individuals. This is due to a campaign from a Swedish NGO that ensured that over 1,000 Swedish individuals replied to the public consultation. But as I mentioned previously, the scientific committees will only look at scientific input, which means that individual replies mainly focused on showing the support of a restriction will not be considered as input because it doesn't have a scientific base or new information. So who replied to the public consultation? This is the graph of the number of replies from different countries and regions. And it might be interesting for you, as pointed out here, that Japan was actually the number 3 of the countries that are replying to an EU PFAS restriction. As I said before, most of the Swedish replies are from individuals. But in the case of Japan, most of the replies, or almost all of the replies, come from industry, which points that there has been some kind of movement within the Japanese industry to reply to the PFAS restriction consultation. As you might know, Japan has a big industry, both chemical industry, but also PFAS producing industry. And this might be the reason why there has been such a huge amount of replies from Japan trying to influence the outcome of the PFAS restriction. So what is the next steps for the PFAS restriction proposal? As I said before, what's happening right now is that the comments that has been submitted through a public consultation will be considered by the scientific committees, RAC and SEAC. And as I mentioned several times, they will consider relevant and evidence-based information, scientific information, in their opinion making. And hopefully they will form an opinion, these committees, by the end of this year, but more probably will come sometime next year. After that, it is up to the EU Commission and the EU member states to take the final decision, which will probably happen during next year or maybe the year after that. And after that, it is all legislation has an 18 months time period until it's enter into force. So I've tried to make an estimated timeline for this PFAS restriction, where you can see the different gateways mentioned on the previous slide. So if this timeline is correct, but I must admit that it's highly unclear how things will develop. This means that there will be a decision taking at the EU Commission sometime end of 2026, which means that we will have a restriction into force 2027, 2028. So a relevant question around this, I think, is it possible to have a restriction on PFAS within the EU? But both people and the politicians are backing actions, backing actions on PFAS, which is very important. And we see that we have a political will to do something with the PFAS issue. On the company side, there is a lot of innovative companies that are developing solutions. We see a lot of new safe alternatives on the market and soon on the market, which means that we have a possibility to find alternatives for PFAS. In addition to this, investors and insurers are distancing themselves from the economic risk embedded in PFAS. They want to avoid the threat of litigation and the threat of losing money on the PFAS production and also the PFAS product topic. So there is a market transitioning that is happening from a lot of different stakeholders. We see a shift towards safer alternatives, and we also see a political will to take legislative action on PFAS. So in summary, on the EU PFAS restriction, it is a very ambitious and a very challenging proposal that's including a broad scope of substances and uses. But due to the fact that there is a lot of impact on different industries and products, this will be a very time-consuming process in order to reach a restriction. But it's important to remember that alternatives are available for many different uses of PFAS. There is a range of different stakeholders, from investors to producers to NGOs to politicians to people that are pushing for legislation on PFAS. And it's also important to remember that this is an opportunity to ensure an increased safety for consumers and workers within the EU. And it's a great opportunity for industry, for innovative companies to provide these new and safer solutions that we will need in the future. And I think that was my last slide. I would like to thank you all for listening. And I'm very, very happy to try to answer any of your questions.
はい、どうもありがとうございました。では、ここから質問をさせていただきたいと思いますが、どなたかパネリストになられている方でご質問をされたいという方はいらっしゃいますでしょうか。大丈夫ですか。それであれば、会場の、Q&A でいただいている、
すいません、時間が
すみません。
もったいないので、質問させてください。14ページの、資料で、PFAS 規制の対象外に殺生物剤、植物保護製品があったんですけども、これは環境中に放出されるので、医薬品はしょうがないとしても、規制すべきだと思うんですけど、どうしてこれが対象外になったのか非常に不思議なんですけれども、何か情報があったら教えていただきたいと思います。これは代替品があると思うんですね。で、日本でも、フッ素系の農薬が結構残留している事実を今日ちょっと知ってしまったので、それについて教えてください。すいません。今日大変貴重な講演ありがとうございました。
Thank you for the question. I think it was a very valid question. And I agree. It is a problem that biocides and plant protection products are emitted into nature. I agree. It's very a bit unclear why they have chosen to exclude it. But I think that the main reason that they have said is that there is separate legislation on these kinds of products. And if I may add, I think that it's also completely correct that there are alternatives for these different applications. In EU, we have a set of both biocides and plant protection products that are allowed to use. So there are alternatives, which of course makes it should make it easier to phase them out. But the persistent part also makes it much better for the use because it makes the plant protection products and the biocides, the effect lasts a bit longer.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you.
はい。では、原田先生から手が上がりましたので、原田先生お願いいたします。
やはり今回、フッ素樹脂含むポリマー製品をかなり含んでいるということはすごく特徴だと思うんで、そのことについてちょっとお伺いしたいと思います。
So I can talk briefly about the why fluoropolymers have been included. The 5 member states chose to use the OECD definition of PFAS, which includes fluoropolymers. And fluoropolymers, from a life cycle perspective, have a lot of, I would say, problematic properties. When you produce fluoropolymers, you have a lot of emissions of other PFAS, and the end of life, it's very problematic because if you incinerate fluoropolymers, you will get other PFAS as well. So on the life cycle perspective, the fluoropolymers are problematic. And I agree, there has been a lot of pushback from industry regarding the fluoropolymers, and there has also been a lot of claims regarding that fluoropolymers can be considered polymers of low concern. I think that there has been also some pushback on those claims. I think that fluoropolymers has shown in the history to be very problematic, and we also see problems connected to microplastics and nanoplastics. We see fluoropolymers in nature being a problem. I mean, they are also very, very persistent. So it is on the whole scale, fluoropolymers is a problem, but I also think that there are several uses of fluoropolymers today that we will struggle to find alternatives for, and where we need new alternatives because they have extremely high performance and they are very good at performing at their applications.
I appreciate your comment, and yeah, of course, so there's so little alternative in some application, but but at least I think fluoropolymer can be eliminated from the cookware.
Yeah, I can definitely agree on the cookware one.
はい、では、どなたかいらっしゃったら教えてください。Q&A、じゃあ中下先生お願いします。
はい、ありがとうございます。大変素晴らしい提案で、しかもそれがなんか実現可能性が極めて高いように今日のご説明で思いましたので、もうとても素晴らしいなというふうに日本の現状を考えると、思っておりまして、大変期待しております。それでちょっと今の現状、先ほどのお話だと、リーチで、リーチの制限というところで規制をするというお話だったかと思いますけれども、そうなりますと、さっきの例えば消費者製品に PFAS が使われているというようなことは、表示はされるものなのでしょうか。それからもう一点、その制限がかかった時までにすでに作られてしまっている PFAS がいろいろあると思うんですけれども、それに対しての規制っていうのはどのようになっているんでしょうか。実は日本ではPFOS、PFOA ですけれども、EU と同様だと思いますけど、これらはストックホルム条約で禁止されているので、日本の法制度の中でも新たな、使用、製造使用ですね、輸出入は禁止されております。しかしながら、すでに作ってある在庫品については、そのまま使用してもいいということになっています。ただし、技術的指針や、一応、なんでしょうね、その表示のようなものについては、一応その気をつけるようにと書いてありますけれども、そういった在庫品が環境中に漏出されてしまったために、環境汚染を深刻な周辺地域に環境汚染を引き起こしているという例が、特に日本の場合は米軍基地の周りとかで今まで起こっているんですね。そういったことについて EU ではどのように規制しておられるのかお伺いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you for the question. So if I answer the first question regarding labels first, in EU, it is fairly uncommon with labeling regarding chemicals compared to the US, for example. So there is no obligation. For example, if you have a product and you produce that and it contains PFAS, there is no legislation saying we need to label that. And there will, within the proposal, there is no proposal to start labeling PFAS containing products either. So I don't think that will happen. So what is the only thing regarding registration is that if you want to use a derogation, it means if you want to keep using PFAS that has a derogation, then you need to register that so the authorities know that you're using PFAS for this product. But there is no part within the proposal to label products that contains PFAS within the EU. And that I think that the reason for that is that historically we have not been labeling products as frequently as I think in other parts of the world. And regarding the second question on products in stock, so what the restriction aims at is placing on the market, which means that it's available to be sold on market, which means that, of course, up until the day they enter into force, you're allowed to produce product containing PFAS. But after the day of the entry into the force of the restriction, you're not allowed to to keep producing these products, because that if you produce something, it's not put on the market. But of course, you can produce as many as you wish before that and sell it so companies can keep a stock. Of course, that will be allowed, but it will not be allowed to keep producing after they enter into force. So I don't think that we will have. It might differ from. I'm not an expert in Japanese legislation, so I don't know the exact difference. But I think that might be a difference. But of course, there will be, if we have a restriction, there will be a lot of stockpiling of different products for companies. And I should also mention that there has been a lot of discussion regarding things like spare parts and other things that might be necessary for machinery and production that we have today. Should that be excluded in order to make sure that we don't have to replace a lot of machinery because of PFAS products will not be available. So there is still a discussion ongoing on this, and I should say it's not completely done, but it is placing on the market that is the end date for product containing these PFAS if it's not derogated.
ありがとうございました。
はい。パブリックコンサルテーションで、日本の企業からたくさんコメントが出たということに、非常に驚かれた方がたくさんいらっしゃいます。皆さん、日本の企業がどういった内容のコメントをしているのかということにご関心があるんですけれども、があるということなんですが、もしご存知であれば教えていただけますでしょうか。傾向や特徴などありましたら教えてください。
So I was also surprised of the number of Japanese companies replying. In general, I have not read all of the 900 replies from the Japanese industry, but I would say that the ones that I have read are all in favor of not having a PFAS restriction at all. They are all in very much claiming that there is extremely difficult to find alternatives, that the alternatives are not used, and that if there is a ban on PFAS, that it will mean that a lot of industries will have to shut down. So that's the general feeling of the replies from the Japanese industries. There has also been a lot of references to a paper, a white paper from, I think, from the Japanese Fluorochemical Council, something like that, where they try to argument against the use of a PFAS restriction. We've also heard that there has been a lot of push from different Japanese trade associations saying that if companies do not reply to the PFAS restriction consultation, it means that they are in favor of a ban on PFAS, and this will of course have a great impact on their business. So it seems like there has been a lot of push from different parts of Japanese industry to really answer and to file replies to the PFAS consultation.
ありがとうございます。パブリックコンサルテーションに出された、意見というのはすべて公開されているんでしょうか？
Yes, so they are available. So they can be found on the webpage of the European Chemicals Agency. But it is 5,600, so it's a lot of documents to read through.
はい。では次の質問に移りたいと思います。はい、EU では17,000もの PFAS 汚染地が発覚しているとのことで、それらが多いこと、そしてそれだけ測っていることに驚きました。これらは PFOS、PFOA、PFHXS でしょうか？また、ハイレベル、高濃度の汚染ということでしたが、EU では高濃度の汚染や、そのハイレベルの基準や浄化の目安などはありますか？
Thank you for the question. So regarding the the 17,000 sites. I should mention that some of these are suspected sites, because what they have done is to go through all the known sites, all the tested sites, but they also gone through where all the airports where the firefighting testing has been done, where they assume that there is a PFAS contamination. So not all of them have actual measurements of PFAS contamination. I think that it's important to clear that. And regarding the standards, I'm not entirely sure what they used for that test. I think that if we look at the drinking water, for example, in EU, we have a set of very different standards. Some countries have 2 nanograms per liter. Some countries have several hundred. In the EU, there was a new drinking water directive setting standards for PFAS, and that's I think it's 100 nanograms per milliliter for what's called PFAS 4, which is 4 of the most used PFAS, and it's 500 nanograms per liter for in total PFAS, which is very high, I would say. Many countries have very much lower concentration than that, and I'm sorry for a very long answer, so just let me know if I should repeat something.
はい、ありがとうございました。では次の質問に移ります。パブリックコンサルテーションに関してなんですけれども、企業から5600のコメントのうち約6割が企業からということです。で、先ほど日本の企業からは規制に反対する声が大きかったということなんですけれども、他の企業の意見も同様だったのでしょうか。これが一つ目の質問です。じゃあ一旦お伺いしていただけますか。
In general, the replies from industry was very negative towards having a PFAS restriction. There were some exemptions from that, but I would say very few. But I also would like to point out that many of the replies from industry were also a lot of claims not being scientific regarding the lack of alternatives or the information that they provided. So it's not. It is not clear that the industry has not provided all the information that's necessary. But in general, most replies from the industry was negative towards the PFAS restriction, whether it's from Japan or from other countries.
はい、ありがとうございます。クレイマーク博士は今回のその PFAS 規制がビジネスチャンスでもあるということを強調されていたんですけれども、じゃあ実際に代替に対して非常に前向きな企業はどれくらいいるのでしょうかというご質問です。PFAS ムーブメントのことをご紹介いただきましたが、これらのムーブメントに参加されている企業は皆さん代替に向けて前向きだということなんでしょうか。
So regarding PFAS movement, one of the commitments that the companies, I think it's 112 companies right now, that one of the commitments that we have towards them is that they support the legislation on PFAS as a family, and that they have an ambition to phase out the use of PFAS within their products and processes. So yes, they support the EU legislation. And regarding the number of companies that are sort of positive and have alternatives, I think that there is a great number of companies that have alternatives that want to phase out. I think that we also see a lot of bigger companies are now doing research to find these alternatives, because there will be a push and there will be a demand for that. So I think there are a lot of companies that will benefit from this. There are, of course, some companies will not benefit, but I think that's the way with the market as well, that some companies are prosperous and some are not. So I definitely think that we see a lot of startups, a lot of research and development, a lot of companies that want to provide these solutions.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。まだまだ質問はあるんですけれども、時間となりましたので、本日は意見交換はこれで終了となります。クレイマー博士、本日はどうもありがとうございました。通訳サービスもこちらで終了となりますので、どうぞご退出ください。
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
それでは、今回の国際市民セミナーもこちらで終了となります。ご参加いただきまして、どうもありがとうございました。終了後、アンケートの画面が出ますので、ぜひご協力をお願いいたします。どうもありがとうございました。